She needed a hero, so she became one. I got that off Layla's Twitter, so this goes out to Layla, Nicole, and the rest of the fan club out in California. Thanks for watching. And in this segment of my series on women in the French Revolution, I'm going to talk about a hero, and someone who had to become a hero, because France was really short on heroes during the Reign of Terror, and that woman is Charlotte Corday. And Charlotte Corday was living in France at the time when heads were being cut off. And it wasn't like they just happened to be cut off. They were cut off because people were stirring it up. And one of the biggest people stirring this up was a guy named Jean-Paul Marat, who I can really describe as nothing other than a professional revolutionary. There are people like Jean-Paul Marat, Thomas Paine, Che Guevara, people who just fit into revolutions when there's need of a rabble-rouser, and somebody just shows up. I can rouse some rabble or whatever. And Jean-Paul Marat had a newspaper called L'Ami du Peuple, the friend of the people. Now, this newspaper, the friend of the people, keep in mind that there's kind of some messaging here. When we think about the branding, it says that I, Jean-Paul Marat, the editor, am the friend of the people. But then there is a corollary to that, and that is that there are enemies of the people. And the whole point of the Reign of Terror, the whole reason why they're cutting off thousands of heads, was that there are enemies of the people. There are counter-revolutionaries. There are people that want to bring down the revolution, and those people must die because the revolution itself is greater than any one life, any thousands of human lives that try to get in the way or even allegedly try to get in the way or anything like that. If someone's even suspected of being an aristocrat, if we catch somebody baking white bread, if we catch somebody using a handkerchief because that is aristocratic, you should just blow your nose like a football player or something like that. And this is happening, and Jean-Paul Marat is supporting it. In fact, in his newspaper, he's just putting out lists of names. Hey, here's a list of names of enemies of the people. You might want to cut their heads off. And when you look at this, we can't really look at Jean-Paul Marat in any other light than that of a mass murderer, of someone who really just needs to be put down. All right, just watched the season finale of The Walking Dead last night. And, you know, there are a lot of parallels here, but anyway, it's not really immediately relevant. But what do you do with someone who is indirectly committing mass murder and no one is doing anything about it? Who is going to step up? Who is going to be a hero? Because France needs a hero. And where there could have been any number of men that stepped up and like, hey, I'm just going to kill this guy. It took a woman, a young woman, to become a hero. And Charlotte Corday, a young woman from Normandy, assassinated Jean-Paul Marat, this Jacobin fanatic, this mass murderer, in 1793. She said that she had a list of names, a list of enemies of the people. And they said, well, come on in. He's in his bath. He had to take a medicinal bath because he'd spent time before the revolution living in sewers and all kinds of other sketchy places. So he had some kind of leprosy or other skin disease. So he spent a lot of time in his bathtub writing his little newspaper and plotting who was going to be next as far as who was going to be killed and who the people's enemies are and all that. And she goes over there and instead of producing a list, she produces a knife. And she kills him. And she says at her trial, I have killed one man to save 1,000. I don't have enough fingers for 1,000, but you get like, you know, a lot. Okay, so just 1 times 1,000, that sort of thing. So that's a pretty fair trade when you think about it. That because I killed this one person, 1,000 people or more live. This is really, when you think about applying utilitarian ethics, the greatest good for the greatest number. So Charlotte Corday calculates that she has done the greatest good for the greatest number. Now, this isn't an attitude universally shared by people in France, some of these fanatics who were supportive of the Reign of Terror. You look at this painting of the death of Marat by Jacques-Louis David. Here is this fanatic, this mass murderer, who looks so serene. It really is reminiscent of the photograph of Che Guevara that when they found him in Bolivia, they cleaned him up. And he's looking very serene and Christ-like, this person who killed so many people in his life in the name of a bad cause and made to look like a saint. And so here is Marat looking like a revolutionary saint, just so peaceful there in his bathtub, soaking there in blood. And speaking of blood, here in his hand you saw something, a piece of paper. Well, here is a copy of the Friend of the People newspaper that is stained with Marat's blood. This is almost like a relic of this revolutionary saint. These people sort of replaced the forms of Christianity with this form of a sort of revolutionary religion of sorts. So Marat is not seen by the powers that be as someone who needed to be killed, but as someone who was a hero of the revolution, and we need justice for whoever took out this Friend of the People. Now, the English, of course, are pretty horrified. Here is an English cartoon, a caricature of Corday's trial by cartoonist James Gillray in 1793. And, of course, I've already talked about Edmund Burke and other people in England who were very horrified at what they were seeing. If you want to see that video, you haven't already, just be sure to click. And I'm just going to read this to you, what's going on here and why the British are so shocked, and really why anybody should be shocked at what's going on here. The heroic Charlotte Corday, upon her trial at the bar of the Revolutionary Tribunal in Paris, July 17, 1793, for having rid the world of that monster of atheism and murder, the regicide Marat, whom she stabbed in a bath, where he had retired on account of a leprosy, with which heaven had begun the punishment of his crimes. The noble enthusiasm with which this woman met the charge, and the elevated disdain with which she treated the self-created tribunal, struck the whole assembly with terror and astonishment. And we see in this picture, here is this heroic woman standing up straight, defending herself in front of these monkey-looking tribunal people, or whatever we would call them. And we see this bloody shirt in the background. You see Marat over there. Ugh. But anyway, this woman here is the hero, even though she is not being treated like it at the time. And Charlotte Corday is addressing these people. Wretches! I did not expect to appear before you. I always thought that I should be delivered up to the outrage of the people, torn in pieces, and that my head, stuck on top of a pike, should have preceded Marat on his state bed, to serve as a rallying point to Frenchmen, if there still are any worthy of that name. But happen what will, if I have the honors of the guillotine, and my clay-cold remains are buried, they will soon have conferred upon them the honors of the Pantheon, and my memory will be more honored in France than that of Judith in Bethulia. Now, here she is saying, look, I'm not a hero right now, but I'm going to be. Richey's going to make a YouTube video about me one day, and all of you, he's not even going to know who you are. All right, so I win. And she mentions Judith. Now, this is a character that appears in the Old Testament Apocrypha, which is in a Bible. If you're Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox, you would find the book of Judith in the Old Testament. If you're Protestant, you won't see this unless you've got a Bible with the Apocrypha added. But here is Judith. Now, of course, this is Caravaggio. This is a Baroque sort of thing here. You notice Judith's got those forearms that would make any man jealous. Looks like we used a male model. But we see that Judith is executing this guy. She's cutting his head off. But notice that she doesn't really look excited about it. And there's a man there. It looks like she's kind of been put up to it. She's kind of unsure of herself. Here, this is 1599, before there's this idea that a woman could kill somebody for a just cause and be perfectly okay with it, that the fairer sex is also capable of heroism. And the revolutionary leaders of the day, of course, did not see Corday as a hero and cut her head off. And before they did, though, they thought that a man must have put her up to this, that there must have been a man that was sharing her bed, and he must have said, look, you should go assassinate this guy. That surely this woman could not come up with this idea on her own, because that would be very unwomanly, right? For a woman to act on her own without a man encouraging her. They went so far as to do an examination, which ended up proving that she had not shared a bed with any man that this had really been her idea. And French authorities, they are disappointed to find this, but they're also kind of scared. This idea that a woman can act independently. The idea that in a nation without heroes, a woman can become one. So the French unceremoniously cut Charlotte Corday's head off, and they're really scared about this idea. Whoa, independent woman. But as the French have time to consider, decades to consider, and they think, you know what, maybe cutting off all those heads, maybe the Reign of Terror wasn't something we should be proud of, maybe Jean-Paul Marat was not a hero, and maybe it's this woman, Charlotte Corday, who is the hero. And we see here in this painting from 1860 where Charlotte Corday is defiantly posed after assassinating Marat with a map of France behind her. And we see here that Marat has still got the knife in him, and he is really not serene. He's just like, ah, or something like that. And you notice that everything is a mess, that you see the chaos of this scene, that this person who has been assassinated was not the hero, that the assassin herself, this independent woman, was the hero. And she becomes this national heroine in France. That we have now, we see the light, and we see that he was a fanatic. She was the champion of reason. She made a decision that saved lives. And she was known by one author, got the title of the Angel of Assassination. So although she wasn't so popular for what she did at the time, she has gotten accolades since then. And we see here a painting of her being brought to her prison. And notice how she looks so defiant. These men are looking kind of weak. Looks like this guard is just smoking a pipe or something like that. But she defiantly goes into her prison. She bravely goes into her prison like the hero that she is. And these men don't look very strong. Well, really, because they're not. Because a woman did something that all of these men could have done, but did not have the courage to do.